said, good morning, everyone. However, I think some of you, it's not morning, it's afternoon or evening. Welcome. So happy to see all of you here. Wonderful to do this with CCLA. Our mother, Temple, glad mom showed up. So fortunate. I'm so pleased that Helen Tworkov agreed to give us some time. She's an old friend of mine, but also one of the most recognized names in Buddhism, at least in the West. Founder of Tricycle Magazine, which I was going to tell you before people got here, but I thought everyone might like this story. I remember Helen and I practiced at CCLA and I guess at Yokoji, and also with Bernie in New York. I recall the conversation. She was telling me about her vision of this magazine for Buddhists and you know, like a magazine that you'd get in the newspaper store next to Playboy and Time and everything. And my response was, oh, you'll never find an audience for that. I remember that so clearly. And actually in the book that she just has out, Lotus Girl, I'll put a link for Amazon for that. But anyway, she says when she started, she didn't, most people had my opinion. She didn't get much, it's hard to get support. Thank goodness Rick Fields was there for you. But anyway, just she's had her finger on the pulse of Buddhism in the West, probably everywhere in the world for all of these years, and just a wealth of information. I was so glad to read the memoir because it reminded me of stuff I'd done that I've totally forgotten. So just a delight to have you here. And we're going to do questions and answers, and Cho, I think, is going to manage that. I'm not sure how to do that with CCLA. I guess hopefully you have a mic there that you can ask questions to. So let me start with the first question, which is along those lines. That part of the book you talk about how hard it was to find support, and particularly as a woman, taking on this tremendous role of documenting and presenting Buddhism to a regular market, to the United States. And I'm just wondering, in your time of watching everything, how you see the role of women in Buddhism, and particularly in leadership roles in Buddhist communities. That's my question.
Well, first, I'd just like to express my gratitude to all of those who arranged for me to be doing this with you. It's a great treat for me, and to reconnect with old friends and old memories from many years ago, and many memories from ZCLA and Zen Mountain Center. So thank you. Well, I think the change has been enormous, as we all know. You know, when you and I started out, Sason, most of the teachers were men. There weren't that many teachers who were women. And many of us, I mean, one of the things I wanted to do in Lotus Girl was to sort of show the kind of messy in between day-to-day life of Buddhists. And for women, that often reflected what was going on in the larger society. And for me, that meant spending a lot of time in kitchens And one of the things that happened with that, and I was just thinking about this the other day, because somebody was saying to me, wow, you were with all these amazing teachers. You got to meet, Dudru Rinpoche. This is when I was at the Tibetan Center before I started studying Zen. And you got to meet Dudru Rinpoche and the Karmapa. And well, the reason I got to meet them is that I was in the kitchen. And I was in the kitchen with some other women, and no men would be in the kitchen. And I was, in retrospect, I'm thinking, wow, what a great gift that was. Because outside of the kitchen, there were these very important men who were running the center. And then there were men who weren't so important. They were really sidelined because they couldn't be in the kitchen with us. So it was actually, it's kind of a mixed blessing when I look back on that aspect of it. But I think we see, as far as I can tell, and you might know much more about this than I do right now, it seems that there are certainly equal numbers of men and women teachers. Isn't that your impression? Yeah, so that's a big change, huge change. I still think we have a ways to go in terms of, in some cases, I think some of the equality is a little bit performative. It's a little bit like being politically correct. So I still think we have to play some catch up with some genuine equality and respect and leadership. I think there's my experience is that there's a bit of a lag there still, but we're getting there.
So do you want to go ahead? Thank you. Thank you. You're right, the kitchen. I remember the kitchen at Roshi's house. That's where all the women were. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So anyone wants a question, has a question, wants to ask, put your little fake hand up. And if anyone there has a question,
Yeah, so if we have in-person questions, well, let's for now try to avoid chat questions, putting them in the chat. It's just kind of a lot to manage. So if you're online and you want to ask something, please raise your digital hand and I'll see it. If anyone at ZCLA has one, just go ahead and put up your hand there. And it looks like we have one in person here in the yurt. You want to state your name and ask your question?
I'm Edward Kane.
You can
So to
grab
speak into this, so I can you can be. So this isn't strictly about Buddhism. I'm just about, I don't know, fairly far through reading Lotus Girl, and I think what I'm getting at is when I saw that Helen Tworkov that you're going to speak, and it just rang an incredible bell in the back of my head. We're about 2 months apart. I was born in 1943 in Philadelphia, you're in New York. But the connection is that as an art student at Berkeley in the 60s, I became totally under the spell of Jack Tworkov. I wanted to paint like Jack Tworkov. I collected. Now that we have the digital world, I've been able to collect photographs of his paintings that I might not, otherwise never, ever have been able to see. So is there a question here? Yes. I got the impression, particularly, of course, from your experience at home and without going into great detail, that you were not into, you were part of that art world because you were the son of, the son and, well, two daughters, I'm sorry. You were related to Jack Tworkov, but you were not taken with the art world. You went in a different direction. How do you feel looking back on his art, what he accomplished and his status, well, the estate of, I guess, Jack Tworkov? Has anything changed in your view of Jack Tworkov as an artist and what he did and what he accomplished?
You're asking about something that I really don't think about much, and
Okay.
I don't really know how to answer it. I I would like to just say one thing, which is not specifically related to my father, but I think that one thing I think about a lot, and it not so much specifically with his own work, but as the society that we're living in, it feels like it's there's so much pressure to get narrower and narrower and narrower, and we're under so much there's so many forces coming at us to get us to think alike and be alike, and whether it's on the left side or the right side, or there's
Mm.
a kind of a conformity and a kind of closing down of the mind and a kind of not thinking for yourself very much. And I experienced that in Dharma groups and outside of Dharma groups. And I feel that whatever my own cynicism about the New York art world was, that art has a very important role to play in keeping our minds open and
Ah,
surprising us, and in
ah,
teaching us new things and teaching us how to look at things differently. And at this point, I feel that in the atmosphere that we're living in, that any way of doing that is positive. That's I feel like I want to support any any way of that keeps the mind fresh or on alert or dislocated or disrupted or having to sort of put things together in some fresh way, because I
ah.
think we're getting a lot of that right now in the society, especially for young people. So
Yeah.
that's not a good answer. That's not an answer to your question, but I don't know
Well,
how to
it
answer.
is. No, because I've never had, I mean, success as an artist. Picasso is probably the only one who can ever really claim great success. He was a millionaire by the time he was 35. Yeah, I sell a couple paintings a year. I do acrylic. It's a long story, but there's something about just doing it, staring at the blank paper or canvas, whatever, and there's nothing quite I can do that. Yeah, so I'm opening the mind, looking at things freshly. There's no substitute for it. Yeah. I think you're right on, spot on with that. Yes, thank you very much. Yes, are you in New York? Are you speaking? Are you in New York right now? Or are you in?
No, I'm in Cape Breton, Nova
Okay,
Scotia.
Breton. I was trying to decide, yeah, okay. All right. Well, thank you very much so much. Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Anyone else? It looks like Kyoshin. Kyoshin, you want to say something?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the question that I had in mind was sort of falls along on that, but sort of veer back to the middle of Dharma and Buddhism, and just your thoughts about. I think a lot of us are very interested in making the practice as accessible as possible to as wide variety of people as possible. And actually, a few of us just were in Japan celebrating Keizan Zenji and his contribution to opening up the Dharma for women and lay people and all. So I'm just very curious in your, overarching view of how things have developed and maybe perhaps how you'd like to see them developed, what we can do to contribute to making the benefits of practicing the Dharma as accessible to as many people as possible. And sort of dealing with, like you're saying, that narrowing and compartmentalizing and polarization that's happening.
Well, I think that there's a great tendency these days, again, especially among young people and among the kind of demands that younger people, including younger people in some of the Dharma communities, to again to conform to a certain kind of perspective. Specifically in this case would be a so-called woke perspective, or to take what I consider a fairly narrow version of what it means to open it up, or what it means to make something accessible or to help. I think we have some very lofty ideas about what it means to help. What did I just think? I was thinking about something this morning. Oh, I was reading something about the helping professions. And of course, the assumption is the helping professions are people who work in medicine. I think that's primarily what it's used for, but it may also be used maybe for therapists, the helping professions, or for, is that correct? Medical and therapists. But and I was thinking, meditators are that's a helping profession. To meditate is a helping profession. And I think more and more I keep wanting to say, sitting down and meditating is social action. It is helping the world. Anything that helps you helps the world. You're in the world. You are the world. And I think sometimes in an effort to reach out for whatever reasons, to bring, of course, we want to help as much as we can, but I think sometimes in an effort to reach out, we lose some of the simplest aspects of what the Dharma offers us. We complicate things. Well, that's what we do. We're humans. We complicate things. Do you know what I'm talking about? Am I making any sense here? That I think, I think meditation is an extraordinary kind of social action. Extraordinary.
Well, I feel happy to hear you say that. And also, I have a similar view that that just also being attentive to folks, to people when we are with them, and also to the environment and everything. So I completely agree that that we can overcomplicate it. And so it's consoling, if anything, to hear you say that. And yeah, so and that really how we are with ourselves, and then how we can share that is probably of the most benefit. But anyway, thank you so much. I just felt like I wanted to kind of segue to that content. I'll leave room for others.
Yeah, I don't see any digital hands here, so I'm gonna check. Anyone waving their hand around? Anyone at ZCLA? Igo, you got a question?
Hello there, Helen. My name's Peter, or Igo. So I'm interested in sort of how the magazine work changed over the years. I imagine that maybe early on, it's like, oh, we need entries, please, like calling your contacts and figuring out what to fill. And I imagine that at other points, you might have so many submissions and need a lot of editing help. And I don't know, I'm also wondering with like that general Buddhist approach, like how you deal with the jargon, because I hear Rinpoche, and I think that might mean you could write venerable in the magazine, or I'm not sure if that's correct. And then over here in this space, we have a lot of Japanese derived jargon, Pali, Sanskrit, whatever. I'm kind of interested in hearing a bit about whatever you think would be interesting for this group of what that was like, because wow. And good to see you over here, and nice to meet you.
Yeah. I haven't worked in editorial for at least, I don't remember, 10, 15 years at all. But those questions certainly came up every single day when we were starting out. Do we use Sanskrit words? Do we have to qualify Sanskrit words? Do we have to define samsara every time we use it? Do we have to define bodhi every time we use it? I think we tried different things at different times. I think at one point we had a little glossary in the back. I'm not sure. I think for words that came up over and over and over again. At the same time, a lot of the idea behind this, as Saison was referring to earlier, was to have a magazine that could be read. We thought we could make a go of it financially if we could approach all the different schools in Dharma. And so are we going to spell Dharma with Dhamma, or are we going to use the Mahayana Dharma? Those came up over and over and over again. But we did want very much to come to some kind of a common language where we could talk to each other. And we felt that we could do that. And I think in terms of the growth of the magazine, that obviously we succeeded, even though we also succeeded in pissing off about just every group that read the magazine. Especially at one point, the the academics went ballistic because we wouldn't allow them to use diacritics. You know, we said that doesn't belong in this magazine. That was a big discussion. I don't remember, you know, coming up with any hardcore guidelines like this is how we're going to do it. And for the most part, we allowed the writer to choose their own language. You know, we didn't ask a writer coming from the Theravada tradition to use the Mahayana terms. We allowed them to use their own terms. And if we felt that something needed to be identified, we would do that. But we pretty well allowed writers to use whatever language was most comfortable for them. And I think, of course, now it's much different because I think we're pretty much, like you had mentioned the word Rinpoche, that's true. I didn't qualify it. I think a lot of people know Rinpoche is affiliated with Tibetan Buddhism, and Roshis are affiliated with Zen Buddhism, and Bhantes are affiliated with Theravada Buddhism. Maybe some people don't, but that's getting worked out in the wash as we go along. And I think more and more there is a common language that we can depend on. Does that answer your question, sort of, a little bit?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Got one more here in the yurt. Oh, Ale.
Oh, go ahead. Good morning, buenos dias. I'm Ale, or Alejandrina, and I started Buddhism going to my local Barnes and Noble library or bookstore and buying your magazine. And spending my afternoons in Encinitas, a majority white community, reading the magazine. And it spoke to me in so many ways. I'm indigenous, and I think I'm sort of contextualizing this to say, within the administrative sort of body of the magazine, at what point, or have there been questions in terms of diversifying the body? Right, Dharma is Dharma. I'm going to get it. It doesn't matter whether it's coming from a purple person, a green person, a brown person, white. It really doesn't matter. But I think politically it does matter. I've seen a lot more since I started, diversification of the voices and the issues that are addressed. You as a leader sort of in this space, at what point did you realize, or have there been any conversations in terms of diversifying the voice of who writes, what is being said, and does it matter?
Oh, I think it does matter. Yeah, I think it matters a lot. It doesn't matter to everybody, but it matters to a lot of people, and it matters to enough people for it to matter to us. Because after all, here we were trying to respond, not just reflect the needs of the community, but to respond to them, to do both. So of course we had to do that. You know, it's interesting when I started out in the earliest embryonic days of this magazine, I worked with Rick Fields. Many of you, he lived at CCLA for many years, so Stacey, you might have known him a long time ago, and some other people from CCLA. I can't remember what.
Very well. Yeah.
He was living there, I think maybe in the early 80s. I don't know. He was working on.
He published CCLA stuff before he started doing. He was in charge of that little pub. You know, we just did. We were not tricycle. But
well, he was living at CCLA, and he was working on his book, How the Swans Came to the Lake. But he and I started talking about this magazine, and we would have these mock mastheads. And I would be sitting there going, okay, you know, this many women, this many men, this many Asian teachers, this many Western teachers, this many writers or what do you call them, contributing editors from this tradition. And Rick would make fun of me, and he would say, we're not the United Nations. When we started the magazine, and then Rick went on to work at another magazine. I think he took over from Yoga Journal, and so I was on my own when Tricycle first came out. And for many issues, years. I was always trying to count up the ratio. Men, women, it was never equal between men and women. In the early days, we always had many more male writers, but then also the ratio between the Asian teachers and the Western teachers, and also the ratio between excerpted material and original material. I was always looking at those numbers. Where I'm going with this is that in those days, diversity meant men and women and Asian and Western. It didn't mean people from different backgrounds within our own society. It did not mean Black Americans. It did not mean Spanish-speaking Americans. It did not mean so much Asian American Americans. So it was that the concept of what diversity meant opened up tremendously. And of course, it was a very big question because the presence of diversity, the need for it and the reflection of it was there way before we could bring in writers. Oh, what was going on. That doesn't mean you just pluck some person of color out of a sangha and say, hey, can you write for us? That doesn't work that way. So we could see these trends going on long before we could figure out how to and eventually, of course, voices did emerge. But I'm talking going back 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we understood the trends before we had, James Shaheen was my successor, and he's a very close friend. He's due here to visit me in a couple of weeks, and I don't know whether he would answer this question in the same way, because a lot of what I'm talking about now really fell under his jurisdiction. But my sense is that we saw the trends before we knew how to accurately reflect them in the magazine. Now, of course, when I pick up Tricycle, I'm very struck by how much diversity, how much color diversity, how much race diversity, gender diversity, sex diversity. I'm very struck by the enormous range that's in the magazine these days. So he seems to be, in my view, he's doing an amazing job with that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, another person in the group here. So thank you so much for being here, Helen. One of the things that that especially after hearing Roshi talk about the early days when you first had this germ of an idea, the thing that's kind of always been a mystery to me is how to take that idea and really bring it to life. You know, I come up with an organizational idea once a week. There should be an organization that does this. That would be great. And I can write a whole business plan and write out the operations and everything, blah, 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 blah. Okay, now I have to actually make it real. And that's kind of a mystery to me. I have no idea how to do that. So can you talk a little bit about that, how it goes from idea to actually being realized?
I don't think there's a blueprint. When I didn't know anything about magazine work when I started. Rick was the one that had some magazine work, mostly in Dharma magazines. He had worked there was a magazine from Trungpa Rinpoche's organization that he had worked on. And he had worked on several Buddhist journals and magazines, but whatever experience there was between the two of us, he had it, not me. So when he left for a real, what we call a real job, I was kind of stranded. And there were a couple of things that were very helpful to me. One is that I had been living at the Zen community of New York, where Bernie Glassman, as many of you know, decided to start a bakery. And he was going to start this bakery, and he himself came out of a math background and mathematical engineering background. There was nobody at the community knew anything about baking. There were like 6 monks there and a bunch of lay students, and he decided that he was going to start this bakery. And what his motto was, if you put your mind to it, you can do anything. Now, I might have taken that to heart as a young woman, but I couldn't. When I was younger, I couldn't hear that. I I didn't have enough so-called, whether confidence or esteem issues, whatever my issues were. Somebody could have said to me when I was 16 or 26 or 36, if you put your mind to it, you could do anything, but I didn't believe them. I just wouldn't have believed it. And so Bernie saying it to me at a certain, to the whole community at a certain point was important. And the other important thing that happened around that time, and I talk about this in the book, at a certain point in my own, and I think with the help of my own practice, I was willing to fail, utterly and completely fail. And I went forward with that acceptance. If I fail, so what? I'm gonna try. I'm gonna give it my best shot. If I fail, so what? It's not the end of the world. But I wasn't able to say that at earlier times in my life. I was just not able to say that. And then not knowing anything about magazine work, people even offered to send me to something called the Radcliffe. There was a magazine course at Radcliffe. It was a very popular course, very famous course that you could take for publishing. And I didn't go. And if I had gone to a class like that or done a course like that, I would never have started Tricycle, because every statistic favored failure. Nobody thought, there was absolutely no statistic that suggested that with having no money and no this and no that, that we could start this magazine. And I think what they miscalculated was something called passion, something called having a calling to do something. I think these things don't get put into charts, and they don't get based on numbers. And so that's my answer. I mean, those are the things that allowed me to go forward. And also being arrogant enough not to listen to other people. That my arrogance actually, it didn't always work in my favor. But I think that was an example where I think it did.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Helen. Looks like Zen Center of Los Angeles has their hands up. You guys want to unmute and ask your questions?
Sure. Just as someone who's had an expansive view of Western Buddhism, both from different schools and across time, you've alluded to a little bit. I'm just really interested in hearing kind of what trends or threads are most interesting to you about Western Buddhism today, moving forward, and also conversely, what threads or trends concern you the most as well.
I'm sorry. Repeat the two trends. What the first was? What is what?
So what are the trends today in Western Buddhism that most interest you and sort of excite you? And then also, what are the trends that most concern you as well?
Let's see how to take your first question. Well, I think, during the pandemic was my own first experience of using Zoom teachings. I'm sort of aged out of the technology world, but I was living here in Nova Scotia. I have a very isolated situation to begin with, and then add the pandemic to that. And fortunately, my Wi-Fi stayed on most of the time. We can have quite harsh winters here. But during those couple of years, I was here straight through, and I had a different view of the technology. I couldn't believe what I could watch through Zoom. I could not believe the Dharma teachings that I had access to. It just blew my mind. And I mean, here we are today. It was not possible without this new technology. So that's something that, at first I think I was kind of skeptical about it. And I thought, well, you could have a certain kind of teaching, but you couldn't go the distance with Zoom, or you couldn't have any kind of visceral, heartfelt sense of transmission, let's say, through Zoom. I don't feel that way anymore. I think that it's extraordinary what can happen through the technology. So I think that's very exciting. some of the things that concern me is that this goes back to a previous question. I think that sometimes there's so much pressure on the American teachers by the younger students to be woke in a very specific way, or to shape Dharma to their own ideological or political views, and not to have those views shaped by Dharma. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me. When I was young, I was very involved in the Vietnam War, and I see a lot of things getting repeated. But I'm afraid that I also see certain number of teachers of my generation and some of the younger generation that are very willing to, I don't want to say sacrifice the Dharma, but they're not holding the Dharma line as much as I would like to see them. That they kind of make adjustments, to how, we really, like why it's really okay to be angry. Well, it is okay to be angry, but not if you stick with it, and not if you make it not if you bring it into your life as a kind of a pathway. Then it becomes kind of problematic. So that's what I see happening. I see a lot of teachers who are kind of trying to support young people, Buddhist people, non-Buddhist people, but trying to support them by taking sides, not really holding the line on what the Buddha might have to say about, quote, not taking sides, who kind of start talking about silence as a kind of complicity with indifference, which as a Buddhist, I find the possibility of silence being being something less than communicative, a very odd view. So those are some of the things that concern me.
Thank you.
Joe, we have another person here, another question.
Hi, my name is Butzgen. You've mentioned Bernie Glassman a few times. Recently, Tricycle had both an article and a podcast about Bernie and Michael O'Keefe, Daegu, that put Bernie in not a flattering light. I know you're not the editor, but I spotted at least one error in Daigu's story. I wonder if there was any pushback on that, or why there wasn't, or if there wasn't, why not, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have no way of answering that. I don't know. You could write a letter to James Shaheen, but that's exactly the kind of editorial material that I'm not engaged with right now. Sorry.
All right.
I can go. Hi, I'm Senshin at ZCLA, and I subscribed to Tricycle the year it came out. And I was living in New York at the time, and I would go to New York Zendo, and I'd walk across Central Park for Change Your Mind Day. And that was like the living magazine with all the different people, Allen Ginsberg, Tibetan debates, and it was just wonderful. I wondered your sharing of stuff about how Change Your Mind Day came.
I do talk about it in the book. It is an interesting story in terms of how it segues with the history of Buddhism in America, because, as you know, my generation of Buddhists, largely the convert Buddhists, came out of the Vietnam era, and we came out of a counterculture movement. And so with that as our background, a lot of what we embrace socially were so-called progressive liberal ideas. We were for world peace, we were for gay rights, we were for civil liberties, we were all kinds of classic, at that time, the situation in South Africa was very pressing, so we were against apartheid in South Africa and against nuclear arms and so forth. So there was a lot of, even when we started in 1991, there was a lot of attempt to, use Buddhism like let's sit in front of the the United Nations for world peace. Let's sit for South Africa. Let's sit for this and for that. And also, and to discuss these things in the magazine. But those things were already in the conversation. They were part of the conversation that every liberal magazine was going to have. So it didn't make any sense to me for a magazine like Tricycle to double down on purely liberal ideologies. And I had also been studying with a Tibetan teacher who had a motto that said, "Useless is best." That was his motto, "Useless is best." It wasn't exactly as literal as it sounded, but it had something to do with what some teachers do call gaining mind. That to sit with any attempt to gain something, you're already engaged in the conceptual mind that's yada 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 yada, and judging and bias and what's good and what's bad. And so to try to sit with a non-gaining mind, not for peace, not for equality, not for this, not for that, sit with no gaining mind. So so that idea for Change Your Mind Day came about as I was driving to visit Joseph Goldstein in the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, in Massachusetts. And I had this idea, what if we just sat? What if we just had a meditation without any attachment to results? We didn't want anything from this. We didn't want to get enlightened. We didn't want world peace. We didn't want anything. We just wanted to just sit. What if we did something like that? And that was the origin of Change Your Mind Day. But I came back to New York and we had a board meeting. I think this is in the book. I think this story is in Lotus Girl. We had a board meeting, and as a kind of a nod to Tinley Norba Rinpoche, I suggested that we call this day Meditation for the Hell of a Day. But we had some blowback on the board. They thought that was very offensive. So Meditation for the Hell of a Day ended up being Change Your Mind Day, and it was wonderful, and it kept going for about 10 years, and there's still talk at the board of directors of trying to restart it. I don't know whether we'll ever do that or not, but there are people who would like to see us engage in that again. I don't know what it would feel like all these years later, but maybe it will work. I don't know.
Thank you.
Can we see Hans who wants to do Change Your Mind Day? Bring it back. You have your seed here.
Looking for other questions now. Anyone here in the yurt? If you could, if you're online, raise your digital hand, because I can't see everyone personally. I guess while we wait, I do have a question. It's Choa here in the yurt. I guess people kind of touched on this. Given your experience with so many different lineages and schools of Buddhism, both in your own practice and with all the articles and writers that you've been involved with, if I was an alien or whatever, someone who just had never heard of Buddhism at all, what would you say about Soto Zen practice in America? What distinguishes it? How would you characterize it? Who is it for? Who is it not for? As compared to other schools and branches?
I think you should ask that question of Roshi. I think you're better suited to answer that question than I am. You
I'd
answer.
love to hear you say that answer to that question. I think for me, that's the one I stumble upon, I guess, because the connection with my Zumi Roshi. So yeah. Oh, I'd love to hear you answer that question. Love to hear what you'd say.
I mean, the way you phrased it, like if you were an alien and you're kind of like, you're kind of looking down on planet Earth, and I think you said like you didn't know any other Buddhist lineages or possibilities. Well, if you really didn't know about anything else, I would just say, well, try it out. It's the only one you know about. But if you look at it in comparison to others, oh, I think the whole thing about looking for a teacher or finding a teacher or feeling comfortable in a tradition, it's so personal. It's so deeply personal. What attracts you, what sticks, what feels right. I don't think those things can be my feeling when people ask me about where to go or what to do, especially now, again, because we have all this technology, you can spend a couple of hours online and you can look at possibilities for fabulous teachers in every one of those traditions. And that could tell you a lot, what sitting, but how to sit and look at it that from with Zen teachers, with teachers at IMS, at the Insight Meditation Society, with Vajrayana Tibetan teachers, with American teachers, Asian teachers, all of that whole huge, enormous display of different possibilities. It's all on YouTube. So that might have something to do with my answer. Go on YouTube and see what attracts you. And like Zen, there's a certain, at least, I don't know what's going on right now in the Zen communities, but certainly when I started out, there was a certain kind of formality, in terms of how you sat and how you held your posture, held your position and so forth. I think that's very attractive to some people. It's not attractive to other people. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you. And since we don't have any other hands, I'm going to take the liberty to ask another question I've been wanting to ask you. Since, we're able to have you here, thanks to our grant around female leadership and centering female voices, I guess I just wanted to ask, in your opinion, from your practice and your point of view, we know that the Buddha himself, back in the day, resisted having women join the practice and join the Sangha. Nanda had to ask him 3 times and he was denied twice, as far as I understand it. Why do you think he did that? What was the resistance?
I think that my projection would be he very correctly thought that it would create a lot of problems. And I think, so I think it was very courageous that he did it at all. And the minute he died, it reverted back to the absence of any kind of equality that was there initially. I mean, he went out on a limb that, as far as I understand it, that got shut down the minute he left us. So, I think all of these things have to be looked at through the context of their times. And I certainly don't know that much about the context of his times to know, but it was certainly what today what looked normal then and what looked normal for most of humankind today looks very misogynistic, very patriarchal and so forth. That certainly didn't look that way in those days. In terms of my own life in Dharma, I know that even as recently for someone like myself, the Me Too movement reshaped how I saw certain things in my own history. It helped clarify certain aspects of my life in Dharma and not in Dharma that I hadn't seen with the same kind of clarity that I did before that.
Wow, thank you. So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions. Holly, did you have another one? Pass the mic.
To that point, I think as a embodied human being in a female body, I've been quite interested. I grew up Catholic, and there is a workshop coming up at the not at the Sweetwater, I mean at the LA Center, but on sacred feminine. And both in my Catholicism as well as in my practice of Buddhism, and to your point in terms of what would have been the reason why Buddha said women can't, right? And they know they don't have the innate capacity to be enlightened, right? There is in me as a female this sort of sense that the religion as a whole, whether Buddhism or Catholicism or other isms, other institutions, are innately empowered. I mean, sort of focus on disempowering the power of femininity, the sacred feminine, that there is some sort of rooted fear of what the power of the feminine could be in subverting patriarchy, and that the actual task is to suppress it, to uproot it for from women. It might be my own delusion that that's what it is. But it's so strong. It almost feels that it puts you in a box, and it doesn't let you be as a female. Your sexuality, there's so much fear of just receiving that energy into practice openly, really. So it's a profound sort of topic that I've been sort of pursuing, and I don't know what your thoughts would be on that.
You know, I think that one of the things that we've played with in Buddhism in America, again, among the convert community, for the last 40, 50 years, is trying to understand something about the relationship between, let's say, the awakened mind and this body, this container that we have, whether it's a male container, a male container, white container, black container, whatever it is, we have these containers. And we've been trying to understand this relationship for a very long time. So, you know, independent of the what you're talking about in terms of the sacred feminine, you know, part of the motivation to start Tricycle, it came after a series of scandals in all the communities. It involved Maizumi Roshi, Trungpa Rinpoche, somebody in Baker Roshi, the Zen communities, the Tibetan communities. And at that, I think, and this was in the middle 80s, and we're trying to figure out, what is this? Who are these enlightened minds that are teaching us? What are they doing with their bodies? What are they doing with their lives? And trying to figure this out. So in some ways, I'm hearing your question as a little bit of the same dilemma. You know, I think my answer always comes back to working with the awakened mind as best as we can, and then letting the pieces in the container reconfigure based on that working, not the other way around. That would be my own, that's my own feeling about it. You know, the pieces will keep reconfiguring based on how little baggage we can, or how much baggage we can put down. Every time we put down another piece of baggage, everything will reconfigure in the body and the container and how we move through the world. But that's going to come about through, I think it's going to come about through our practice and our practice of working with the non-conceptual mind. Any sense to you? Is that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. That invitation to work with the awakened mind, because to your earlier sort of comment in terms of there being no expectation to us sitting down, none whatsoever. I don't sit to appease my sexuality or to quiet it down. There will be, if I work with that awakened mind, something that will happen with my
Yes.
body. What
Good
that is, who knows,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right. Yeah.
My ego can become engaged in thinking, well, I'm going to reconfigure, I'm going to engage, I'm going to push, I'm going to force it to become this.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah.
your invitation is to just work with the awakened mind and let it work its own energy, power.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's what I, good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Looks like we have time for one more. Zen Center Los Angeles has their hand up. Let's pass it over to them.
Yes, I'd be curious to your thoughts about the trend of Zen and psychotherapy or Buddhism in the larger context in psychotherapy. What do you see are some of the pros and cons?
You know, I really, I'm going to have to back off of that question because I don't really follow it till its current situation. I certainly know that 40, 50 years ago or 30 years ago, when I was practicing meditation and I was in therapy, I had a lot to say on what the differences were. But it seems to me from what I know that there are so many schools of psychotherapy now that have been so influenced by Dharma and by meditation that there's much greater integration. And I don't know where the differences are right now. I really don't. I don't read contemporary sort of Buddhist psychology material. So I think I think it's a very, very rich field, but I really don't follow it. I'm sorry.
Thank you all so much. It is 12 o'clock on the dot. I think that's pretty darn efficient. Thank you, Helen, so much.
Thank you so much.
Let me add to that,
Please.
just, oh my gosh, so great to see you after all these years and your expression, and coming out for us from Nova Scotia, and it's really appreciated. And buy the book, you guys. It really is a great read, and it's easy. It's it's just a great story. I know so many people are interested in the old days, like you think the old days were really cool, and they were chaotic. I don't know about cool, but there's just great stories about the history of Buddhism. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.